Okay, so I'll start presenting now. So just give me a quick feedback if you are able to see the screen. So can you see the screen?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Can you see what is written over here, like this notes?
Yes, sir.
Okay. So if you have any doubts while we are conducting this course, you can straight away, stop in me in between. But let's see how it goes now. So today, this is lecture three, and what we will be discussing is neural networks. As you know that we had stopped last time on neural networks. It was a starting of it. So today we will go more details into the neural network, and we will understand the basic architecture of this neural network, like how it looks like, and how researchers got motivated in finding these type of structures, and from there we will see the basic understanding of this neural network, like how forward propagation goes in this neural network, and then how and this all these things will be step by step. It will not be like immediately I will show you a neural network and I will ask you to understand it completely. So we will build the neural network step by step, and we will see how it is evolving with the time. So to start with, as you can see, this slide here. So what it shows you is basically a biological neuron. So what happens is this neural network, the term neural is basically getting inspired from neuron. So that's why this neural network is available. So what happened is, like, most of the scientists from engineering community must have communicated to the biological doctors and all the doctors that are available in a medical community, and they ask them, like, how we can model how we can model this neuron which is available here. As you can see, it's a complex entity which is there in our body. So what we call this as is a neuron. So it's a single layer neuron. Okay. And it has following components. The first component is dendrites, as you can see here. And then the second component is the cell body. Third component is the nucleus, which is there, as you can see over here. It's a nucleus. And then we have axons. So what happens is, in this particular neuron, when the scientific community people contacted doctors and asked them, like, how this particular neuron works, what they have told these scientific people was, like, there is some information in terms of the impulse. Like, there will be some impulse activity coming from some other neuron, and what happens is this impulse actually passes through this dendrite layer. So once this impulse passes through these dendrite layers, so we will have multiple such kind of information which is coming from other neurons, and they will be passing through these dendrites. So dendrites are actually acting as a input port to this neuron. So once that happens, it gets assembled at this particular nucleus, and after that some pre-processing happens here. And in this pre-processing, what happens, it generates a impulse actually. So impulse is like a sudden spike, and then nothing is there. Then again a sudden spike and nothing is there. So something like this activity will be coming out from this nucleus when the information is flowing through these dendrites. So that type of activity, doctor told to most of the people in the scientific community, and from there actually what they did is they they created a simple uh, neuron model which looks like this. So it's a mathematical model that represents or mimics some part of the behavior. Actually, you cannot completely characterize this neuron, which is very complex in nature. It's a very difficult. But what you do in normally in scientific community is to approximate whatever behavior we have for this complex structure. So in engineering also, whenever you try to formulate some natural phenomena, what you do is you approximate. For example, like the way, for example, now we have this COVID disease, and as you know that what people are doing is they are actually approximating the propagation of this COVID through some partial differential equations, and that partial differential equations are actually approximation of the actual disease transmission. It's not the actual partial differential equation. So most of the engineering is actually approximation. So in the same sense, what they have done is they have actually created a approximated version of this using this particular mathematical model. The second thing that I wanted to tell you here is that there will be multiple interconnection of the neurons. As you can see here, this is one neuron and this is the second neuron. So what we have is there is an interconnection between the two, and the interconnection is done through this synapse. So this synapse is giving you a connection between the two neurons. So once the action potential is created, the one which I am showing you here, this one. So once this action potential is created, so what happens is through this synapse activity, this action potential is transmitted to second neuron, and then the information is passed through these dendrites, and then it will be again following the same activity as we have discussed for this particular neuron. So this shows the interconnection between the two neurons and how they interact using the synapsing activity. Okay, so once this is done, so as we discussed just a few minutes back, is that the neuron is actually represented by this particular mathematical model. So what it says is you have x1, x2, x3, and these nodes available here. So these nodes are actually the dendrites. So they are dendrites which actually takes input from outside, as this is represented here. So what happens now is these dendrite inputs are weighted by these values, which is W1, W2, W3, W4, and it can continue to Wn. So they are actually weighted individually and then summed at this particular point. So this summing is actually happening at cell nucleus, and these are dendrites. And then what happens is then we are applying a non-linear activation function f to the summed inputs, the weighted sums, and we generate a impulse or the action potential. So this is basically the output which we are discussing here at this point. So if we write the output of this particular block diagram, then it will be what? It will be f, which is the non-linearity that is acting on the summation of xi's, wi's, where I running from 1 to n. So this is basically the mathematical equation which governs this particular uh, mathematical model, which is actually an approximation of this uh, of this actual neuron, and this is the artificial neuron. That's why we have this name, artificial neural network. So once this is done, so you have seen a complete analogy between the one which we have created here and the actual neuron here. But the only thing that I have not told you is the weights, how these weights are actually coming. What is the reason behind it? Because here I cannot see any weights. So let's see what these weights are and why, how come the scientific community has introduced these terms W1, W2, and W3 based on the discussion um, with the doctors. So now this is the thing which will give you actual intuition behind the weights which are actually coming with the dendrites inputs. So as you can see, I am showing you here three different pictures, and this slide actually I have taken from Cambridge University Press, and what they are showing is the development of the brain child. So what they have done is they have scanned the brain of a child, and that scanning is done on the cerebral cortex of a human. So they are showing you three different snapshots of the brain development of a child. One is at the birth, the second one is at when the child is at when the child is of 6 years, and the third one is when the child is of 14 years. So it is showing you a actually a scanning of the brain. So what is the main thing that it's observed here is during the birth, when the child is born, at that time there is very sparse connections. There is only one connection here, and this is a isolated artificial neuron. So, oh, no, not artificial, actual neuron. This is another neuron which is floating over here, and this is another neuron here. So there is no interconnections between them. So you can see all these neurons which I am shading over here are actually sparse. This is the big one here, but they are all as an individual identity. There is no interconnection between them. So this is during the child, during the birth. But as soon as the child becomes 6 years, now you can see how these all neurons are getting interconnected with each other, because you can see how complex this structure is all. And I can show you if I can. Here you can see if you have this particular neuron, how it is actually connected with so many other neurons which are available here through all these connections. So all these interconnections are formed in between the neurons. You can see here also there is one neuron which is the main one, and how this is densely connected to other neurons. So the density of the neurons interconnection is increasing when you move from birth to 6 years. And the reason for that is during from birth to 6 years you will find lot of information that your brain will be processing, because you will be told to walk, and you will not be told to walk, but you will be doing it yourself. So it's something like a reinforcement learning that is happening in your brain, and you will understand the things yourself when you will interact with the nature. And some people will speak with some different languages, like depending upon your region from where you are, you will be speaking your mother tongue also, and you will be speaking some language which is in schools. So multiple languages you will be speaking at that time, and because of that you will have multiple interconnection of the neurons that will be happening. And see, the important thing which is here is the density and the weights. You can see this weight over here, and you can see the weight that is formed over here. So you can see the thickness of the weights. So the weight which is here is having a less connection, less weight, and and the the connection between the two neurons here is having a more wider weight. So depending upon the nerve weight which is connecting the two neurons, we have different weights involved here. So this one, let us say, is W1, and this one, let us say, is W2. This is W1. So this W1 is having very thin weights connecting the two neurons, whereas in this case the connection has very thick weight. So, and as you go more and more older, and at 14 years you see again only the relevant weights are there and the rest of the weights are gone. So some of the interconnections are gone, because there are some informations which you already, there is no point in remembering that. So some of that interconnections are lost now here, but the main ones which are required at that particular stage at 14 year will be there, and it will have a very strong interconnection like this. So based on this study, that is how the brain of a person varies from birth to 6 years to 14 years in terms of the interconnection. They came up with this factor W here. So these W's are nothing but they are actually varying with time. So when you are at 6, when you are at childbirth, these weights will be sparse. By sparse means most of the weights will be zero and some of the weights will be there. As you can see here also, it's a sparse weights. That is, most of the interconnections are zero and some of them are there. But as the child grows, the density of these weights will increase. And then after a while, like when you grow old, like at 60 years and 50 years or 60 years, and this again will become sparse, the weights. So on that type of phenomena, what on that by considering this fact, the doctors have the scientists have introduced these weights with the dendrites. So this is the motivation behind it. So I guess it is okay. I think everybody is okay with this. Okay. So again, I'm telling you, if you have any doubts, please interrupt me in between, because because I will be thinking like you all are understanding what I'm telling. But in case if you have any doubts, you can discuss. So today, what we will do is we will discuss forward propagation. By forward propagation means if you have this particular node, that what you want to do is you are input in you are passing a input and you are getting some output here from this particular node, and this is the neural network node that we are discussing over here, this particular thing. So forward propagation is passing the information from left side and it goes towards the output. So what I am doing here is, again I am representing that particular neural network which we have discussed just two slides, one slide back, is in this form. This is the representation in terms of the mathematical formulation. So I will spend a few minutes here because it is important to understand the convention. If there is a confusion in the convention, then it will propagate very heavily into the other slides and you will not be able to understand properly. So please understand this slide so that you follow the conventions that I am listing over here. So the first thing that I am showing you here is the input feature vectors. So these are the input feature vectors which I am representing by X, and as you can see we have a subscript here and a superscript here. So this particular thing is basically following this convention. So what is this? Subscript, if you are writing it as a subscript, means you are actually dealing with the particular example. So in this case, I am having only one example. So that's why I am writing one over here, this thing. So all this will be one because we are dealing with only single example case right now. And this is basically the features. So these are the features of that particular example. So right now we are considering only four features. So you can see here I am writing it as a subscript over here. So four features are here and only one example. So this particular layer is having one example and this particular example has four features. Okay. The second thing is the weights, which we already discussed in our earlier slide. So these weights also follow this particular convention. So what is this convention here? So we have these weights, and this particular thing which is written in the superscript is actually a current layer. That is the layer at which you are there. So right now you are at the first layer. So we will write this as 1 here. And if it is a second layer, then you will write 2 here. Third layer means 3. So basically based on the layers you will have 1, 2 and 3. And the second thing is the subscript here. This is J and K. So what this J and K is saying is from where you are moving, from to. So in this case, as you can see, since we are on first layer, so we are writing 1 over here. So everything is 1, this one, this one, this one, so everything is 1. But now please focus on this subscript over here. So this is 1 1. So why 1 1? Because you are moving from here, which is this to this. So the nodes, which is the node is 1 here and 1 at this point. That's why we are writing 1 1. For this case, it is 2 1, means you are moving from node 2 to node 1 here. So that's why we are writing 2 1. So from 2, and this is for third thing, which will be 3 1, and then we have 4 1. So this convention is regarding the weights that you have. Okay, this Z is basically the matrix which we will discuss. It's a summation which it's basically implementing the summation which we have discussed over here. As you can see, we have this summation, right? So this summation is represented by this Z over here. So this Z is actually bold. Please note that it is bold. We will discuss later why this is bold and all that stuff. But as you can see here, again we have two conventions here. Like one is I, another one is J. So this corresponds to the layer at which you are, and this corresponds to the node at which you are. So this is an example where you have only one layer and one node. That's why you have Z11. And once you do the summation, then we have an activation unit, which is actually this one, this F. So this F is actually implemented in the form of matrix A, and it's also following that same convention. That is, it has a single layer 1 and you have node 1. So single layer node 1, that's why A11. Okay, so and one thing is, you will see some as you will proceed, as we will proceed here in the next slides, you will see somewhere I will be writing this Z also, which is not bold, and in somewhere also we will write AJ, which is not bold. So all this all this Z and AJ, which are not bold, are actually the components of this matrix. That is Z and A. We will see, but that components will be following this behavior. Like the components of Z will have this indexing, where Z is basically the one which is here. Z is basically the index to the layer that we have already discussed. That is, since we are at first node of the first layer, so J will be 1 here, and then this is basically the layer which we are dealing with, that is the current layer, and then in brackets we have K. So this K is actually the example which you are actually currently using. So here we are using first example, then K will be 1. Similarly for this Aijk, and this Aijk are basically the components of this matrix A, and this Jij is actually a components of this matrix Z. So this is the basic terminology, and now what we can do is we can write all this summations which we are discussing here in this way. So now since we have single training example, by single training example means we have only one example which has 4 features. So in that sense you can write Z11. See here, so we have Z11. Now I am writing it as Z1 and then 1. So this one is basically the current layer. Since you are at layer 1, this is the node corresponding to that, and this is the example that you are actually seeing. So you are currently looking for only one example, that's why it's 1 over here, and it's, as I told you, it's a summation, so it will sum all the elements. So it has W11, X11. So these this W11 will be multiplied with X11. This W21 will be multiplied with X22. W31 will be multiplied with X33, and like this you will sum it together, and you will add a bias also here, B11. So this I forgot here. This is the bias. So this bias B11 also follows the same convention as it is in case of Z and A. So I am adding this here. So the important thing is, instead of writing these equations which I am writing here, it is very cumbersome. The point here is, in my lectures you will see all the matrix implementation of these lines. Like, if it is here, like if you write like this, it is very cumbersome. So how to write that in terms of matrix? That is the main crux of doing faster implementation in these codes. So in order to implement this in a form of matrix, what we can do is we can represent this equation which is given over here in this form. So as now you can see, this Z1 is now bold. Earlier it is like this, and I told you that this one, the one which I am discussing here, is the components of Z. As you can see here, we have these components, and these components will be the elements of this matrix Z. So that's why I am writing it as bold Z here. So which this bold Z is having only one component in this matrix, and that is Z11. And now the second thing is, we can write this expression which is written over here in a very simplified way using this. So it's a W11 transpose X plus B11. And let's see what W11 is, the one which I am discussing here. This W11 is nothing but it's a matrix of dimension 4 cross 1. and it's represented like this, and this one which I am focusing important, it's a very important thing. Since you are writing 1 here, that means you are actually at that particular node. So here you have first node of first layer. You are actually this is the first node of first layer. That's why all these are 1. So all these are 1 here. So this W11 is a 4 cross 1 vector. Now since we are dealing with only one example, as I have told you here, we are dealing with this one example. So this is represented in this way, in this matrix X. This is the feature on the horizontal, or features are represented in row form, and then we have examples in this in column form. So if you have one example and 4 features, then it will be represented as a 4 cross 1 vector, which is given over here. So in that way, if you do matrix multiplication, then 1 cross 4 is the dimension of this weight matrix, and 4 cross 1 is the dimension of X. Then the effective multiplication will give you one element. And then you have B11, which is also having one element. So when you add these two together, you will get only one element matrix. That's why you are getting Z11 here. So this is the first implementation in form of a matrix form from this implementation. So this is not a matrix implementation, this is the matrix implementation. And we will see how we will grow further and further, and these equations will become more and more complex. Okay, so now the second part of the equation is the activation unit. As you can see here, this Z11 will be passed to this activation unit, which is the nonlinearity. So what I am doing here is, we are adding a nonlinearity here. So it's a sigma. It's a general nonlinearity I'm adding. It's not necessary that it's a sigmoidal only. It can be anything, but I wrote it here sigma, but you can take tan hyperbolic also. It's not a constraint. You can take ReLU also. So this is the sigma, which represents a nonlinearity which is acting on this Z11, and note that this is also a matrix. So since we have evaluated that this is a 1 cross 1, so when you operate a sigma onto this, you will again get a 1 cross 1 activation. So again, when you represent in matrix form, the bold A will be represented like this, which has only one element. And this is the predicted output, which is y hat. So now, if you see this particular example where we have taken a single training example and a single node, like single neuron, and a single training example, then this is the equation that we have for this. So this is the equation. First equation is this, and the second equation is this. No, not this one, this one. So now we have considered a very simple case. Now the second case is, let us say we have that same architecture, but now we have multiple training examples. So by multiple training examples, earlier I had one over here, now it's I. So if it is I, then what we'll have is I is running from 1 to 5 or anything, it depends upon your training sample. So right now I am taking only 5 samples. So I is running from 1 to 5 over here. Okay. So in multiple training example, what we have is this matrix where the rows represent the features which are n. So we have n features here, and the column represents the examples which are m. So this is basically a generalized expression where we have n rows as features and m as the examples. So the dimension of this matrix will be n cross m. And since we are dealing with only single node, as you know, we have only one node in the first layer, so we will have only one mate matrix, and that is represented like this, which we have already discussed, and the dimension of this is 4 cross 1 and the dimension of this is n cross m. So let us take a small subset of this particular example which I am showing you here. In that case, what I am doing is I am taking only 4 features and I am taking 5 examples. So in that case, what happens is this matrix will be represented in this fashion. As you can see, here we have 5 different examples showing through 5 different colors, and the corresponding you can write corresponding examples. Like this particular example can be written in a condensed form like this also, which is a 4 cross 1 vector. So if you write only x1, that means it is having all the components, all the features of x1. If you write x2, that means it has all the features of x2 here. So this shows you the corresponding vector representation of this particular individual expanded vectors. And also you can see how different examples are stacked in the form of a matrix, where you know the rows will be your features and the columns will be your examples. So in the same way as we have done earlier, we can write individual z's for each of these examples. As you can see, the highlighted section here is actually the example number. So the first example, when you pass it through the z, it will give you this equation, and this is also yellow. So it will give you this equation, which is given over here. This is simple. It's just the addition of the inputs, weighted average, weighted inputs addition. That is W11, X11, X21, and like this. And if you have, you know, second example which is coming over here, then again you will write this, which is given over here. As you can see, the colors are changing depending upon the input that you are feeding. Then you have Z1, and then you have the this is for the third and this is for the fifth. So as you can see now, you are writing it in normal equations as I told you earlier, and it's very cumbersome. So this is not a good idea even when you will implement this neural network. So the main important thing is how to make this particular set of equations in the form of matrix, so that everything is calculated in one go. So that is what we call as vectorization approach. So what you do is you vectorize, you make the vectors out of it and do matrix multiplication, so that everything is uh, implemented in a very fast manner and efficient also. So now again, as you know, the summed output, that is Z, will be passed through the activation units. So these are the different activations which will come up because of the different inputs that you are feeding in. So these are all different inputs. Because of that, you have different activations for these inputs. So now if you want to implement this in code like this, the way I have represented, it will be very slow as the neurons will increase, and you can realize that. But once we do it in a vectorized form, it will be very fast implementation. So let's see how we will do that. So now what we will do is we will write the vectorized implementation of above equations. So the first equation that we have here can be easily represented. You know, we have already discussed it. We can represent this equation easily like this. So I hope there is no doubt in this equation, as we have discussed in our earlier slide on this. And as you can see, we have different input here, x1. And this individual x1 is a 4 cross 1 vector, which is given over here. Similarly, you can write the corresponding activation, which is this one. Then you can write it for the second input, which is this one. So you are writing a second input second input summation Z1 in the form of matrix implementation, and then you have its corresponding activation also here. And again, you continue to do that for different inputs. You will get the activation Z1A, Z1A for the fourth input, Z1A for the fifth input. So for each of these individuals, you are actually getting the matrix implementation of this equation which we have represented here. So we have 5 equations here. So you will have 5 such implementations in the vector form and 5 activations. So correspondingly you will have 5 implementations here. So this is represented in terms of a vector form, but now we can club all these equations. Like for example, I will focus on this equation. So like I will focus on Z11, this one, all the Z's. I will focus on this now first. So can we combine these all 5 equations of Z into single equation? Yes, we can do that. We can do that using this implementation. So now you have, you can represent all these 5 equations using this matrix multiplication. So here each of these Z1s is basically represented as W11 transpose X plus B1. But now the difference is that your X now is having a 4 cross 5. Earlier it was not that. So now it's a 4 cross 5 where 4 is the feature vectors and 5 is the inputs. And the corresponding B1 is represented like this. It's a 1 cross 5. So basically I forgot here. Uh, you have, one here also along with this. This will be 2. This will be 3. And for this it will be 4. And for this it will be 5. So because of that, we have this matrix B which is bold, and each of these individual components will be all this which we have just appended. So all this will be forming a 1 cross 5 vector. And then you have Z1. This Z11 is the bold Z, which is now a 1 cross 5 vector. And earlier it was only 1 because you had one input. But now you have multiple examples. That's why you have 5 over here, because you are taking 5 examples, so it will be 1 cross 5. Okay, so one more thing I want to discuss here. It's a slight confusing here, but I think you will get a hang of it later on. So what I'm doing is I am representing this particular W1 transpose as this symbol. So it's a different symbol that I am taking just to, because it should have, I would have taken a small w, but I had taken some capital W. So just to, not to redo again all these equations, what I have done is I have created this new W here, which has this, some peaks, just to identify, just to make it distinguishable from this W. So what I am doing is I am saying this W1 is now W11 transpose. So I'm just replacing this W11 transpose by W1. It's just for our simplicity. So when you do that, what happens? It's a 1 cross 4 vector now because you are transposing it. So in that way, if you write this expression, then this complete expression which is written over here, this one, can now be represented with this. And the only difference is that W1 transpose is replaced by this new W which I am writing over here. And this B1 which I was discussing, each of these individual elements are this. As I told you that I made a mistake here, so it has to be all these 3, 4 and 5. So all this will be the components of this B11, and this dimension is 1 cross 5. Okay, so this Z1 which is now 1 cross 5, what is that? This Z1 is actually having all these 5 components with each of these individual inputs. So right now we are considering 5 inputs, so it will be Z11, 1, 2, 3, 4 and 5. Okay, so once we are clear with this particular equation, then what we have to do? We have to pass it through the activation unit. So what is that activation unit? That activation unit is given by this. Simple, right? So you do a nonlinearity on this particular vector Z11, and the dimension of this is also 1 cross 5, and this dimension is 1 cross 5, and each of these individual components of capital A are small a11, a12, a13, as we discussed during the convention that we had already discussed in our first slide, as I'll show you again. So this one. So these are the individual components of this matrix, which is here, for this bold matrix which is here. Okay, so anybody having any doubts during this, please let me know if you have any doubts. Okay, so what I'll do is I will proceed again further. So now the next case is, see, we have already discussed two cases. The third case is, now we are doing a arbitrary input m and arbitrary size of n. So here now, earlier we were taking n as 4 and we were taking m as 5. So now I'm taking arbitrary input dimension. So your x will now be a dimension of size n cross m, where n is 4 and m will be 5. So it's a complete matrix, input matrix, having on rows features and having examples on m dimension. And since we are still dealing with only one node, so that's why we have W11 here, as the node is only one. So in that case, all the equations that I have discussed here, this yellow one, this one, and this one, so they can be easily, replicated again. But the only difference is now the dimensions of this will become 1 cross m. The dimension of this is 1 cross n. The dimension of x is n cross m. And the dimension of b is 1 cross m. And since we are having only one hidden node, that's why 1 is coming over here. And we have feature vectors as n, so that's why n is coming over here. And your dimension of x is n cross m, and this is 1 cross m. So you can see the dimensions also dimensions matrix multiplication matches from left to right. So that's why it's a vectorized implementation of arbitrary size of input capital X having n features and m inputs. Again, I am writing this W1 transpose as this, as I discussed in our earlier slide. So this is just a way of avoiding this W1 transpose, though we are internally doing it in this matrix W11, but it's just a simplified way of doing it. That's why I am creating this hypothetical symbol over here, having this. And this is again the same equation which is over here. Just I replace W1 transpose by this W1, which is the new one. And again, then this Z11 will be passed through the activation function sigma to give you this matrix, that is A11. So these all are vectorized implementations. They can be done in a single step. In case of earlier equations, you had to do it, each of them one by one, as you can see here. All these equations. Otherwise, if you do it, you are programming expert. All these equations. If you take and do the addition, multiplication, it will take a lot of time. Instead of that, if you do it through these matrix multiplications, it will be very fast, and within a second you will get the results for all these equations. So this finishes off with the case where we had single neuron and we varied inputs x. We took single example, we took 4 example and 5, and then we generalized it to m features and n features and m examples. So this is what we have done. So this is also called as a single layer perceptron. This is also called as a single layer perceptron, where we have only one node in layer 1. This is a hidden layer, so we call it as a single layer perceptron. So now let us discuss this capacity of this single layer neuron. By capacity means how this single layer neuron, how many problems it can solve. So we have to see whether this particular neuron model which we have come up with is able to solve the real life problems or not. If it is, then it will be very good. But for us, we have to see what is the limitations of this particular single layer perceptron, which motivated us to come up with the advanced architectures of this neural network. So in order to do that, let's do a AND realization of a using neural networks. So I hope everybody knows about the digital circuits, what is AND, what is OR, what is not. Can anyone just give a small feedback on that? Yes or no will work for me.
Yes, sir.
Okay, so this AND is basically nothing but a truth table where we have two inputs x1 and x2, and you have output 0 1 0 1 0 0 1 1, and then at the output what you have is this 0 1 0 0 then 1. So this is basically the AND input which we have in digital circuit. So what we want to do is we want to implement this through a single layer perceptron. So as you can see here, a lot of things are going on here. So what I'm writing here is we have two features here, x1 and x2. As you can see, we have two features, x1 and x2, and I'm writing a superscript here as I, which means you have multiple inputs. Like it's not that you have only one input here. I'm representing it as I means you have two features as n is equal to 2 and m is equal to I, where I can run from 1 to 5 or anything. And one important thing is that this features will be either 0 or 1. That is the main constraint. And what we have to do is we have to implement a function which gives you a AND operation. So this is the truth table of this particular AND operation where we have um, four inputs here. Let us say 0, 1, 0, 1. And then for this particular example, I am taking four inputs. And then you have x2y which is having these four inputs. So what will be the output? As you all know, for AND operation, it is 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, and then 1 in the last stage. So now what we do is we create a diagram of this on this feature space. So this is, let us say, the first feature of xi. This is the second feature of xi. So these are, since we have two features, so it can be represented easily on a two-dimensional plane. So this is the first feature of an ith example. This is the second feature. So if you take this particular case where you have 0 0, in that case your output is 0. So that is represented over here because both of them are 0 here. In the second case, you have xi as 2, xi1 as 2, and this is 0. So that will be represented as what? It will be represented by this. Third case will be this one. And the fourth case is when both of them are 1 is this. So by clearly seeing the distribution pattern of these points, you can immediately realize that you can distinguish or separate these two lines using this hyperplane. Oh, this line. It's not a hyperplane because we are working on two dimensions. But if you go on to higher dimensions, then it will be a hyperplane. And the basic perceptron is basically represented as W transpose X plus B, which we have already discussed so many times. As you can see over here, this is the equation, and this is the equation of a line. So that's why you know that single layer perceptron can at a max represents a straight line, as you can see here because of this equation. So you know that a single layer perceptron can implement only straight line and nothing else. So as you can see now, because the patterns are like this, you can fit a straight line. You can draw a straight line like this, which can classify these 2 points. So now the important thing is how to come up with the W and B of these lines, because you have y is equal to W transpose X plus B. So you have to come up with these W and B so that you can fit a line over here. Okay, so now what I'll do is I am representing this by a simple neuron model which we have already discussed, as you can see over here. And I am representing with all the conventions that are already discussed in detail. And now the problem is how to find these W11, W21 and B1, because we know that we can do something like that, but how to find these weights and bias is the important point. So let's discuss how to find these weights which are here and the bias. So you know one thing, let us say we don't have a bias. Let us say for a time being, we will say, okay, we don't need bias and we don't need it. So let's have only these two inputs. So if we have these two inputs, you know Z11 is very simple. It's actually summation of xi1 plus w211 xi2 plus, no, so we are not considering bias, so it will not be there. And you know y hat will be sigma times Z11. Simple, right? So these two equations you already know. And please note that I am, for a timing, I am not considering the bias term. So now I am repeating it here, this equation. So this is basically Z11. Okay, so you know this sigma, which I was telling you earlier, it's a nonlinear function, right? So let us say this is a sigmoidal function, which is given by 1 upon 1 plus e to the power minus x. So this is basically a sigmoidal function. If you plot it, it will look like this. And you can see here there is an important thing of this sigmoidal function. That is, if you are greater than 0 and you are on the positive side, the values are greater than 0.5 and it lies between 0 and 1. It doesn't go exactly to 1, but it lies between 0 and 1. But if you are on the negative side of z, see here it is z here, and this is sigma z, so it is z and this is also z. And if you are on the negative side of this z, the values that you will have from this particular sigmoid will bound between 0 and 0.5. So that is quite obvious by seeing this particular diagram. So if you see the truth table again, we have discussed these three already, and you know that for this particular case where we have 0 0, the output is 0. This means what? This means your output y is lying between 0 and 0.5. Why it is so? Because I have told you that if your output is 0 means somewhere between 0 and 0.5 you will be lying in this region. So same for this and same for this. But for this case, it is saying the output is 1. That means you are somewhere lying between 0.5 and 1. So it has to be somewhere between 0.5 and 1. And the reason why it is exactly 0, 0, 0, 1 is because what happens is it hard thresholds the output. Actually, the outputs of all this 1 1 will not be exactly 1. It is somewhere like 0.75 or something like that. And when you do a step function on this, then it will turn out to be 1. So basically you are actually pulling the value which is between 0.5 to 1 to 1. So, and similarly, if you have values between 0 and zero point 0.5, you pull down to 0. That's why you have exactly 0. So in terms of the activation unit sigma, what we infer is that if it is 0, then it has a value less than 0.5, and if it has a value of 1, it has a value greater than 0.5. So if that is the case, what will be the polarity of Z1? The Z. So the polarity of Z, in case as I have discussed here, if it is between 0 and 0.5, the polarity of Z will be negative. As you know, all of them are in between here if the output is negative. But if the output is positive, then the polarity of Z is all positive. So that's why only one case where we have Z as positive is given over here. For the other cases, it is all negative. Okay, so once we agree on to this point, then we consider the first case. What is the first case? The first case is when you have 0 0 here. So in that case, if you plug in these values of x1i and x2i as 0 0 in this equation here, then what will be the answer? The answer will be that it is w10, w20, because you are plugging 0 0 here, and uh, basically you are plugging this z1, this x1i x2i on z expression. This z expression is this one, so we are plugging on this, not onto the complete. So that's why when you plug Z1, when you plug these values of 0, 0 here along with W1, W2, then the constraint that the Z should have is it has to be negative. So as you can see, it's not possible because both of them are 0 on the left side, but on the right side it is negative, and it's not possible to do that without the bias. So as you can see here, that without the bias it is not possible. So what we do is we add a bias. So now, as I told you earlier, that if I remove a bias, then it's not possible to implement the AND gate. So now, because of this constraint which I have shown you, we are adding bias now. So now we are adding the bias. So once the bias is added, and we let us take it as minus 30. That individually depend on your choice how what value you have to take. But the main intention is to make it actually negative or less than 0. So in order to do that, I have taken minus 30 as the value. So if you add the bias now, then you have this equation and it satisfies. So this shows that the bias is important and it has to be incorporated. The second case, in the second case, we have 1 and 0. So this 1 and 0 are plugged in here. Now bias is there because of the first constraint, and also we know that it has to be again negative. And this is 0, so it becomes W11 minus 30, and this is negative. So now important thing is how to make this negative. It is only possible when you make W1 less than 30. Then only it is possible, right? So if you make it 20, then it will be negative. So let us take W1 as 20. It depends on you whether you want to take 10, 5, 6, whatever. It doesn't matter. And the only thing that matters is this constraint. So now you have W1 as 20. Now the third case. Third case is this one. This one. So now you put this one, and again you will get this constraint, and you know that it has to also be less than 30. So let us take W2 as 20. So I am taking W1 and W2 both as 20 just to satisfy this constraint. And the last constraint, when both of them are 1, we have this constraint. So this is very important. You see here, I am taking W1 as 20, W2 as 20, then only it is getting greater than 30. But if you take some other combination, it might be the case that it is not greater than 30, then it will be a problem. So for a fixed bias of 30 that you have taken, your W1, W2 has to satisfy this constraint. So based on that, our 20, 20 as a W1 and W2 and B as minus 30 works for us. So based on this analysis, what we have found out these two important points. And the first point is there is a need of bias, which we have ignored earlier. And you know that this bias has to be there in order to, you know, successfully implement this as an AND gate. And the second thing is that the unique value of W is not possible. As you can see, I told you that W you can take at any value, but you have to satisfy all these four constraints. So these two things are very important. So based on that, I have, implemented this, and I'm telling, okay, this is minus 30, this is 20, this is again 20. And now you know these things, like, this is the new W that we introduced. This is this one, this is 2020 transpose, the B11 is minus 30. So this is just the implementation of the equation that we have already discussed in so many in details. So this is basically the Z11, which is written like this in a form of a matrix, which is given over here. And then I'm just substituting the values which are given over here. It is 20xi, 20xi2 minus 30. And then the activation y, which is given over here. So it is a sigma which is operated on all these inputs which we have found out. So earlier these weights were not known and biases were not known. So we have through the truth table achieved these weights and biases. So this will be the estimated y. Okay. So once we have this, as you can, this is the expression that you have, which is here, which is y hat. So if you put all these individual xi's and xi's2, xi's, all these values over here, the one which is given over here, then what you will find is that when xi1 is 0 and this is 0, then you will get this value, which is minus 30. In this case, you will get minus 10. In this case, you will get again minus 10. But in this case, you will get plus 10. So this you obtained through substituting the values of xi in this equation. So once you have this, as you can see, when you are operating at minus 30 means you are operating somewhere here at this point. So at this point, because this is the value of z, and this is z here, and this is z here, and this is also z, and this is also z. So you are operating somewhere here. So that means what value you are getting here? You are getting a value close to 0. So this answer will be 0. How about this? You are operating at minus 10 here. It also will give you 0. Same for this, but for this it is plus 10. So this value is close to 1. So it will be 0.999 something. So that value is actually 1, which is this. So this shows you that you can implement a AND gate using a single layer neuron, which is given here, which is also called as a perceptron. So in the next class, we will discuss one or two more examples, and then we will discuss what is the disadvantage of this perceptron model and how to overcome it. So for today, I am ending this lecture here. So if you have any doubts regarding this particular, lecture, please let me know. So shall I assume that everybody has understood this? Okay, then let me finish this class today and we will meet on Thursday. Okay, thank you so much.